chemical bond between the dopamine and the dopamine transporter. And when you don't have enough dopamine activity, you can't slow down the sensory input. You're being overpowered. The midbrain, which has to do with emotion, is being overpowered with sensory input because there's not enough dopamine around. Okay, you're overloading the midbrain. You're overloading the amygdala, which has to do with rage. And you're affecting the limbic system with a great deal of input, and that has to do with emotion. Okay, so at the synapse, normally from the presynaptic neuron, you have a neurotransmitter that goes over the gap and stimulates the next neuron. Now what happens with dopamine is it actually causes a double back to the neuron that just released it, and it depolarizes that cell, which makes it harder to stimulate that cell. Okay, now these are just neurons. These aren't specific enough to what I'm talking about. So dopamine depolarizes the cell that releases it. It makes it harder to stimulate. It decreases the amount of sensory input on the midbrain and the centers of emotion, rage, and depression. And since I've got less than 10 seconds, I suppose, to go with, I'll stop right here and say that there's an enormous amount about the brain, an enormous amount about the body that we don't know. And people like Raphael Mechoulam and basic researchers that are out there looking at how the brain works and the endocannabinoid system works are opening the door to a tremendous mystery. And we're just scratching the surface. And it's very exciting to be a part of all of this. And I turn it back to our moderator.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much, David. We certainly appreciate that. It's 1979. He graduated from the University of Michigan Medical School in 1974 and completed his family practice residency through University of California at Davis in 1977. Since the passage of the California Compassionate Use Act of 1996, he's been performing medical cannabis evaluations and has written and lectured extensively on the subject. In 2004, he co-authored the widely read article, Implementation of the Compassionate Use Act in a Family Medical Practice, 7 Years Clinical Experience, which is designed to be a blueprint for physicians in making safe and appropriate recommendations. That same year, he founded medicalboardwatch.com to keep watch on the Medical Board of California actions against physicians who make medical cannabis recommendations. Dr. Lucido is a member of the Society of Cannabis Clinicians and Physicians for Social Responsibility, and he's here today to talk to us about his current research into the therapeutic potential of cannabis. Thank you very much, Dr. Lucido.
I also was just asked to be on the advisory board of NORML, along with former police chief of Seattle, Norm Stamper, who was on the stage earlier today. I'm going to step down there so I can read my own notes. This mic here that I know goes a little longer. Can you hear me? No, we're not on, huh? The microphone. All right. Traditional will still be the re-emerging application, since we have three generations of doctors and patients rediscovering this forgotten traditional uses. Or we can look at emerging as a novel, and that will include what Herman and Russo's text, Cannabis and Cannabinoids, refers to as the basic research stage. Autoimmune disease, cancer, neuroprotection, fever, disorders of blood pressure. And again, they divide it up into established effects, like the ones that even Marinol has labeled, nausea and vomiting, anorexia, weight loss. Number two, relatively well-confirmed effects like spasticity, painful conditions, especially neurogenic pain. Dr. Don Abrams is doing a study on neurogenic pain. Movement disorders like Parkinson's, asthma, glaucoma, and then there's less well-confirmed effects, allergies, inflammation, infection, epilepsy. Although you think about it, the traditional uses were epilepsy, depression, bipolar disorders, anxiety disorders, dependency withdrawal, and what I mentioned earlier, the basic research stage. I did a survey that was part of the article that they mentioned that's published in O'Shaughnessy's, and I took 348 consecutive patients in a half-year period, and the majority were chronic pain, about 80%, headaches, I lumped the gastrointestinal symptoms into one, nausea, anorexia. So there's a number of different diagnoses there. Chronic anxiety, depression, etc. And it continues on. A few patients with MS, dysmenorrhea, Meniere's, restless leg, OCD, Parkinson's. Okay, so I'm going to go through each of these now. The established effect, and I'm going to talk about some specific patients.
We're holding it a little too close. We're holding it too close.
Okay, how's that? Is that about the right?
Yeah. It really works well.
Except every time Alan did this yesterday, it would change every time he turned his head. So we'll see. All right. All right. So again, one of my patients, you don't hear it as well.
Yeah, I know.
That's good. All right. All right. This was a 38-year-old woman who really wasn't a cannabis user very much at all. She had rectal cancer, unfortunately had to go through severe radiation therapy before surgery. She had so much nausea that if she wasn't a smoker, she started using it in a tincture. It really helped her after she was done with her chemotherapy, surgery. She basically has a cure, one of those lucky people, but she stopped using it when she didn't need it. Classic example of somebody using it medicinally, not really caring for it socially, and stopped using it afterwards. Severe anorexia, of course, this patient is the one patient I can talk about. Angel Race that went to the Supreme Court, and she's okay with me talking about it. Most of my declarations on her website. So again, severe anorexia, cachexia among all the other diagnoses. Again, severe nausea, vomiting. That's the patient up there. She was able to continue her work as the medical workup progressed. Relatively well confirmed spasticity. Cerebral palsy. I have a man in his 20s who was able to graduate from UC Berkeley. He's one of the, cerebral palsy can be pretty severe, and it can be people that look pretty normal and just have a stutter. So I have two patients to talk about there. One was this man who's a patient of ours, and he graduated from UC last year and just really severely handicapped. He can move around, actually needs an assistant. He can't even really move the wheelchair around without an assistant. But he was able to use the computer and graduate and it's dramatic. When he would smoke, you could hear him talk a little bit better from his early. And the same thing with
That's why NIDA has chosen 15. But there is technically no reason it couldn't be 5. It's easy enough to do, and probably could be 1 reliably, I think. Although background noise ratio, I don't know how clean it will be. I don't think I've heard anything. We'll hold questions till the end. I'll stick around.
Thanks, Stephen. We have one more speaker. Her name is Jenny Kern. She's from the Drug Policy Alliance. I've known Jenny for a couple of years and can say that she does very, very good work, particularly on the issue of drug testing and student drug testing. She is the point person at the EPA on this issue of random student drug testing. She is co-author of the booklet, Making Sense of Random Student Drug Testing, Why Educators Are Saying No. It is an excellent booklet. I would encourage everyone to get their hands on it and read it. That book was produced by TPA in conjunction with the ACLU Drug Law Reform Project, and most recently, EPA has been sending her all around the country to stir up opposition at these student drug testing summits that the White House is putting on that are actually paid for by our tax dollars. And as Marcia said yesterday, I think without people like Jenny and other groups opposing student drug testing at these sort of summits, we would see a much larger proliferation of student drug testing than we have seen already. I would like to bring up Jenny Kern, who is actually leaving first thing tomorrow to Milwaukee to go to the final drug testing summit sponsored by the White House this year, but she did hang around one day to speak to you guys. So please welcome Jenny Kern.
Thank you very much, Paul. Great introduction. The bottom line with student drug testing is that our country, our government, is spending a lot of money on these surveillance programs where we really need to be spending this money educating students. The White House has asked for $15 million this year for random student drug testing programs. At the same time, they've asked to cut